The dressing room at the Las Vegas Hilton smelled of hairspray and spent adrenaline. It was October 1974. Elvis Presley sat in front of the lighted mirror and said nothing. Charlie Hodge had been watching the clock for 12 minutes. The pre-show preparations were complete. The Aztec jumpsuit was on. White, with turquoise and red beadwork that caught light and threw it back in pieces. Everything was ready in every way that could be measured, and not ready in the one way that mattered. Elvis was 39 years old. He had been performing professionally since he was 19. 20 years of spotlights, of becoming something larger than himself so consistently that the smaller version was difficult to locate anymore. The touring schedule of 1974 had been relentless. More than 100 dates since January, each city dissolving into the same corridor of arena hallways and hotel rooms. He had given every one of those rooms what they came for. He was not sure anymore what he was giving. Something felt wrong about tonight. He couldn't find it. It wasn't his voice, which had been inconsistent lately but was holding this run. It wasn't the band, it was a weight in the room, a feeling of accumulation, as if all the nights and all the songs had gathered here and were pressing in. He picked up a towel, set it down. "I'll go out in 5, he said, to no one. The showroom held 2,000 people at small round tables from the stage lip to the far wall. The Hilton audience was specific, more expensive, more practiced at receiving this particular thing. They laughed at the right moments with a professional ease that came from having done this before. They had arrived knowing what they expected, and they expected to receive it. The fanfare started. 2,000 people rose at once, and Elvis walked into the light. For the first 30 minutes, everything went the way it was supposed to go. He opened with CC Rider, and the room ignited. He moved through the early set with the efficiency of someone whose body carries knowledge without consulting the mind. He crouched at the stage lip and pressed his forehead to the forehead of a woman in the front row who had been coming to these shows since 1969. He distributed scarves. He told a joke that landed. The room relaxed into the pleasure of being near someone who knows exactly what he is doing. He was somewhere in Polk Salad Annie. The band locked into its churning groove when it started. A sound, not a word yet, a thick, formless noise from somewhere 3 tables back, left of center. He heard it between measures and let it go. The band played on. He moved to the other side of the stage. 30 seconds later it came again. And on the third occurrence, it resolved. "Play something real." The words crossed the music with the blunt authority of something that doesn't care what it interrupts. Elvis heard it. The nearest tables heard it. The band heard it. Charlie Hodge catching Elvis's eye for a fraction of a second before looking away. Elvis finished the song. He stood at the microphone with the towel Charlie handed him and looked, without obviously looking, toward the center floor. He found the man on the second scan, middle-aged, somewhere between 50 and 55. A sport coat over a dress shirt, both of them disheveled, collar loosened, jacket sitting wrong on his shoulders, a drink in front of him that was mostly ice. Another glass, empty beside it. He was drunk. Not newly drunk, but durably drunk. The kind that has been building since before dinner, and has settled into loud, specific grievance that can no longer be kept quiet. The people at his table were rigid with the discomfort of strangers witnessing something private. A couple to his left had angled away. A woman across from him was staring at the stage with fierce concentration. Elvis had seen drunk men at concerts before. He had seen everything at concerts. He had learned to perform around disruptions the way a driver compensates for imperfect roads. Automatically, without breaking concentration, he signaled the band to start the next number. 3 verses into Love Me, the voice came again, louder, emboldened by the silence it had received. "This ain't real. This ain't what it used to be." Turned heads, a ripple of attention moving outward from the table. The woman across from him put her hand over her eyes. A security man in a dark suit began moving through the tables toward the source. Elvis finished the verse. The band covered. But in the brief space where the music breathed, the man's voice came a third time. You don't even care anymore. You just go through the motions. That one landed differently. Not because it was louder. It wasn't. It was quieter. The quietness of a statement rather than a performance. The man wasn't playing to the room. He was talking to the stage, to something he thought he recognized. Elvis finished the song, and then he didn't signal the next number. He stood at the microphone and said nothing. The room went quiet in the gradual way of 2,000 people individually deciding to stop talking. The quiet spread from the stage outward until the whole showroom was holding something. Not silence exactly, but the anticipation of it. The security man had reached the drunk man's table and was standing beside him. Elvis looked at the security man. He made a small gesture. 2 fingers, slow and horizontal. Wait, the security man stopped. Let me ask you something, Elvis said into the microphone. Not the performing voice. That full, shaped instrument that filled rooms and registered in the chest. This was below that, the voice he used in conversation, slightly rougher at the edges, carrying the faint trace of Mississippi that had never entirely left. He was looking at the man. You said I go through the motions. A pause. Tell me your name. The room was completely still. The man looked up at the stage with an expression that moved through several stages quickly. Defiance. Confusion. The beginning of embarrassment. Roy, he said. Smaller than he'd intended. Roy. Elvis repeated it without inflection, without warmth performed, or edge performed. Just the name, recognized. How long have you been coming to these shows, Roy? Silence. Then, since '69, 5 years. Elvis was still looking at him. What were you expecting tonight that you're not getting? It wasn't an attack. Anyone listening carefully would have understood that. It was the question of someone who genuinely wanted to know the answer, which made it, in some ways, harder to receive than anger would have been. Roy, whose wife had left him 8 months ago, who had driven to Las Vegas alone for the first time in his adult life because he had run out of other ideas for what to do with a particular autumn, looked at the stage and could not find words. I don't know, he said finally. His voice had lost its combativeness entirely. He sounded tired. He sounded like a man who had driven a long way and arrived somewhere that wasn't quite what he'd hoped. Elvis nodded slowly. He handed the microphone to Charlie and walked to the edge of the stage. He sat down at the stage lip, not a crouch or a kneel, but fully sat, legs hanging over the side, the way you sit on a porch step. This was not a position he ever used during performances. It was a position for a conversation. He was perhaps 20 feet from Roy's table, close enough that when he spoke without the microphone, Roy and the nearest tables could hear him clearly. You're right, Elvis said. About the motions, the room held its breath. Some nights it's easier to go through them than others. Tonight's been one of the harder ones. Roy stared at him. The drunk's unfocused defiance had resolved into something more confused. The look of a man who came in one door and found himself in a different room. You've been here since '69, Elvis said. So you remember something I remember. When it was something else. When I was something else. He wasn't performing this. That was the thing the people at those nearest tables would try to explain afterward. He was saying something he had been trying to avoid saying to himself. And it was happening in front of 2,000 people. I know what you're looking for, Elvis said. I wish I could give it to you. He sat there a moment longer. Roy said nothing. His hands were around his glass of melting ice, and he was looking at Elvis with an expression that several witnesses later described as stricken. Not dramatically, but in the way of someone who came to pick a fight and found themselves inside a confession. Then Elvis stood. He reached his hand toward Charlie, took back the microphone. He looked at the security man and gave a small shake of his head. Leave him. The security man stepped back. Elvis looked out at the full room. Let's try again, he said. He looked at the band, counted them in, and Always on My Mind began. It was not a song that typically appeared in this position in the set. The band found it, the way musicians who know a catalog find anything. Not by remembering, but by listening to where the chord wants to go. And Elvis sang it the way he rarely sang it in concert. Slowly, with the full weight of what the lyric was actually saying pressing through every word. Maybe I didn't treat you quite as good as I should have. He was looking at no specific part of the room, or at all of it equally. The performance of specificity was gone. What replaced it was harder to name, but easier to feel. Maybe I didn't love you quite as often as I could have. At Roy's table, the woman across from him had stopped staring at the stage. She was looking at Roy. Roy was looking at the stage, and something had happened to his face. A loosening, a release. His eyes were wet. He was not trying to hide it. The song moved through its verses into the chorus, with the quality of something written about one specific thing becoming about every specific thing at once. 2,000 people holding their own private sorrows still at the same moment produces a stillness that has mass and texture. The room had it now. Elvis sang it through to the end without embellishment. Just the song, just the words, just the thing the song was actually about. The applause came differently than it had earlier. Not the reflexive response of an audience completing a transaction. Something fuller. Something that took a moment to begin, because people needed a moment to remember where they were. Elvis pressed the towel Charlie handed him against his face and held it there a beat longer than necessary. At Roy's table, the security man appeared again, but Roy was already rising, not being removed, leaving of his own accord, moving through the tables toward the exit with the careful steps of a man who has become very aware of his own body and a crowd. The man to his left touched his shoulder briefly as he passed. Roy didn't stop. He walked out while the applause was still rising. He didn't look back. Elvis watched him go. Then he turned to the room. "Thank you," he said. Not his standard patter, not leading into an introduction, just a statement. Then, "Let's keep going." The second half of the show was different from the first. Not better or worse by the measures that reviews used. More present. There was less of the smooth professional distance that a seasoned performer develops as self-protection, and more of something unguarded that is harder to sustain but closer to what audiences are actually reaching for when they buy the ticket and sit in the dark and wait. When he sang "How Great Thou Art," his voice opened in the way it occasionally did on that song, finding registers that pure technical training can't produce. The resonance that comes from somewhere below the instrument and can't be summoned on command but only allowed. Charlie Hodge stood in the wings and watched and understood what he was watching. After the final bow, Elvis walked off the stage and stopped at the edge of the wings. He stood still for a moment, with his head down. Charlie was beside him with a towel and a bottle of water. "Did someone get his name?" Elvis said. Charlie knew who he meant. "Roy something. Calloway, I think." Elvis nodded. "Send him something from the gift shop. Something decent. And a note." What should the note say? Elvis thought for a moment. Just, "I heard you. That's all. Just that." He walked down the corridor toward the dressing room, the noise of the showroom fading behind him into something that might have been the memory of a sound. Roy Calloway received a package that evening at the hotel where he'd taken a room for the night. Inside was a standard promotional photograph, the kind sent by the thousands to fan mail addresses. On the back, in handwriting dictated to a staff member, were 5 words: "I heard you. Thank you." What Roy Calloway made of this, what the autumn had cost him, what he did with the rest of that particular season, none of the people who knew anything about this story could say. He was not a public figure. He appears in no documented account of Elvis Presley's life, except in the recollections of a few Hilton staff members who remembered the exchange. He was just a man in a sport coat at a center table, speaking to something from a distance and being surprised that it answered. The musicians noticed something in the remaining shows of that Vegas engagement. Ronnie Tutt noticed it from behind the drums. a willingness to linger in places that usually moved past quickly. James Burton noticed it in the way Elvis turned toward the band mid-song, in those moments when someone is actually inside the music. Charlie noticed it in the ballads, which were slower, stripped of some of the armor they usually carried. Elvis thought about Roy Calloway for days afterward, not with guilt, with the particular quality of attention he gave to things that had reached through the performance and landed on the person underneath. He thought about what it means to arrive somewhere, looking for something you once had, and find only the shape of it. He had been on both sides of that. He knew the man on the floor, and he knew the stage. And that night, briefly, those two things had closed the distance between them. He had told Roy, "I wish I could give it to you." He had meant it. He had also meant something he hadn't said, that the thing Roy was looking for might not be entirely gone, that sometimes stopping is the only way to find what you've been missing. He found it that October night, in the space between a drunk man's challenge and a song sung without armor. You find what you've lost, not by searching, but by stopping. Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977. He was 42 years old. The grief that followed surprised even those who had been predicting his decline for years. Surprised them because it revealed how many people had been holding a private, personal version of him, built from individual moments that no one else knew about. Roy Calloway was one of them. He felt it because of 5 words on the back of a photograph. He felt it because of a man who sat down at the edge of a stage one October night in Las Vegas and chose to hear what was underneath the noise. The capacity to be truly heard, past the performance, past the role that every encounter assigns to the people in it, is perhaps the rarest thing one person can offer another. It requires the willingness to stop, to sit, to let a question land without reaching immediately for the answer. Elvis Presley was a performer of uncommon gifts and a man of uncommon limitations. He was human in ways that are easy to overlook when the mythology is large enough to fill a room. But on that night, with the show in motion and a stranger in the middle of the floor saying something true in the wrong way at the wrong time, he stopped. He sat down. He asked a question and waited. That was all. That was everything.